Tonight, we're at the Carolina Theater of Durham for a conversation about an issue that's captured headlines nationwide. Please stay with us for a special focus on law and order, building bridges, mending communities. Next. Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Holt Noel. Welcome to Focus on Law and Order, Building Bridges, Mending Communities. Tonight, UNC-TV is in the city of Durham before a live audience with a panel of leaders in law enforcement and community to talk about a problem in our nation that concerns policing, racial bias, and citizen responsibility. Both law enforcement and communities say what's really needed is an open and honest conversation where both groups feel heard and understood. We're here at the historic Carolina Theater of Durham to give volume to your concerns, your questions, and your ideas for solutions. To help make that happen, I'm not alone. In the audience with me here is UNC-TV's Mitchell Lewis. Mitch?
Thank you, Deborah, and good evening, everyone. Now, we want this to be a conversation, and you, the audience here at the Carolina Theater, we need your help. Now, there are two ways that we can do this. First of all, you can come and see me at the microphone if you have a comment or a question that you would like to ask. Be sure to raise your hands, and we'll have someone to lead you to me in order to do that. But if you are shy, you can go online. You can either by Twitter or by Facebook, you can send your questions or your comments, and you could be doing that by using @UNC-TV or hashtag #NCIssues, and that's on Facebook and Twitter. And we're going to try to get some of those comments on the air during this program. But for some of you at home who want to get in on this conversation, you can do that as well on Facebook and Twitter. And all you need to do is go to our handle, which is @UNC-TV and hashtag #NCIssues. Deborah?
Right now, I'd like to introduce our stage panel. We have Travis Mitchell, President of Communities and Schools, Wake County, former Executive Vice President for the Black Family Channel, and Mr. Mitchell is also a member of the UNC-TV Board of Trustees. North Carolina House Representative Edward Haynes, Jr., representing District 72, Forsyth County. Stephen Combs, Director of the Criminal Justice Training and Standards Division with the North Carolina Department of Justice. Jose Lopez, Chief of Police for the City of Durham. Nia Wilson, Director of Spirit House Community Organization in Durham. Wayne Scott, Chief of Police for the City of Greensboro. And Christopher Blue, Chief of Police for the Town of Chapel Hill. We're delighted to have all of you here. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'd like to start out by addressing an issue that's really become a concern of a lot of Americans, and that is racially biased policing. And I want to direct this question to our chiefs. Please tell us, what are your thoughts about this concern, and also how you are addressing the concern in your city? And would you answer both questions? Let me begin with you, Chief Lopez.
Well, first of all, as far as the racial profiling in the city, that's something that in the city of Durham, we totally are working towards identifying and seeing what it is that we're doing if we're not stopping people at regular intervals, and looking to make sure that our officers aren't engaging in any bias. We're doing that through monitoring not only what it is that the officers are doing in their stops, enhancing the state forms to make sure that we can get the information that we need in order to be able to collect the data and identify whether the officers are doing it. And also, we're looking to check to see what the officers are doing by checking their video in their cars and in interactions. Those are just parts of it. We have regular reports that we put out that identify our traffic stop reports, that identify our any indication of bias, internal affairs investigations. We're also putting our officers through fair, impartial bias, and we're also looking to put them through a lot of diversity training here in the city.
Chief Blue, can you share what's happening in your city, and also what are your thoughts about the issue?
Well, I think we've, particularly for the last year, we've been having really important conversations, some of which are long overdue in this country. And we're pleased to be part of that discussion. So I think you'll probably hear the three chiefs repeat a lot of the same things because North Carolina law enforcement, I think, is working really hard to address these issues and actually lead across the country. You heard Chief Lopez talk about the fair and impartial policing training, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little more detail about that throughout the evening tonight. But I'll tell you, North Carolina law enforcement leaders are leading across this country in terms of bringing that training about bias and how bias might affect policing in our communities, bringing it to North Carolina law enforcement officers. And we're proud of that. There's much work to be done, and in Chapel Hill, we're doing many of the same things that Chief Lopez talked about. Just recently, I think something that's very important is we enacted a policy. We never had a policy that said we will not tolerate bias in our policing. It's really important to have a policy statement, and it's not a real long policy. There's not a lot of detail there, but the statement itself is very important, and it's lent itself to important discussions in our community.
Chief Scott, please.
And I agree with what my colleagues have said. You know, in North Carolina, we have begun to look at how can we do our jobs better. And in Greensboro, we began that really some time ago. In 2012, we began to look at what bias meant for the city of Greensboro, and we redefined that. A lot of times you'll hear the phrase racial profiling. We elected to change it to bias because it's more than race. So in the city of Greensboro, we've been very frontline. We also entered into the bias-based training. We've contacted some national authorities to come in and give us training on a national level. We instituted our body cam program almost 2 years ago, which gives us a tool by which we can really find out exactly what our officers are doing on each and every encounter. So it's important. As the other chief said, I think as a state, we should be proud that we are moving forward.
So some proactive steps to try to address the concern. Representative Haynes, you have also been instrumental in working on some body cam legislation. Tell us about that piece of legislation, which you hoped it would achieve.
Absolutely. There are actually two pieces of legislation that I was instrumental involved in this past long session in the General Assembly. One of them was actually a police bias bill that was actually spearheaded by Representative Rodney Moore out of Charlotte. And it addressed many of the issues that our chiefs have spoken about today from a training standpoint of requiring that training happen within the police forces and also requiring the adoption of bias policies within their HR policies there. And so it's good to hear that this is happening at some of these police forces and in these departments already. One of the pieces, though, that has gotten the most attention has been the body camera legislation that I ran along with Representative Kelly Alexander out of Charlotte. Part of what makes that bill so important is that the title of the bill itself, and that was protecting law enforcement and community relationships, because we recognized early that this really was about making sure that we understood that the interrelation between law enforcement and the community is one that cannot be denied. It's one that has to happen. It's one that we all need. And so we took very proactive steps early on, making sure that we were getting that message across. We worked hand in hand with leadership in the House to make sure that we moved that bill through the House side of the General Assembly, and ultimately ended up having that bill passed into the budget with 110-2 vote. And now we wait to see what happens from the Senate. But it's a bill that was received very well. We worked with our law enforcement community across the state to make sure that the bill was one that we could all stand by and work with. And it's not the end, it's just the first step toward making sure that we maintain these positive relationships that we must have between the community and law enforcement.
Thank you. And as we mentioned, we are taking your questions via Twitter. I have one right now. Mitch actually has one. Mitchell?
Well, this one is from Kyla from Raleigh, and the question is, are officers using body cams that they cannot turn off? And since Greensboro is initiating body cams, Chief, I lead that question to you. How do the cameras work?
Well, and let me clarify, we were actually 2 years into our body cam program. We were very proud of the fact that we did lead many in this country and then the state with doing that. What we try to do is we try to have a balance. We believe it's important that our body cams are on, and it is not a decision by the officer as to when it's on or off, but led by policy, as the representative said. It's almost not feasible for us to run one 24/7 because of the management of the data. But instead, in Greensboro, we think it's important to capture the initial contact of every call, the initial encounter, so that we have a record as to exactly what occurred. And then we lay out those things in policy which we find that are typically those things that we need, that we build the trust through, those communication errors that occur between police and the community, so that we can go back and look at those things. We do not use them for all investigative purposes because there are legal problems that come about with that. And so we try to use them basically at any opportunity we can, that we can solidify that relationship with the public and add to trust.
And along with the trust, I would imagine also the training for how to use the body cams, as well as just overall training in racially biased policing, in racial bias. And Steve Combs, I wanted to go to you and ask, how important, how much of a priority is it in your office to make sure that officers are trained and understand the fact that there is this racially biased segment that interferes?
Well, it's a large priority. In North Carolina, to become a law enforcement officer, with few exceptions, you have to go through basic law enforcement training. That training at this time runs, it's about 616 hours. It covers 36 topics and typically takes approximately 16 weeks to complete. And throughout these topics of basic law enforcement training, there's discussion about profiling, there's discussion about use of force. So it's covered in great detail throughout basic law enforcement training. Officers in North Carolina are also required to complete in-service training, mandatory in-service training, which consists of 24 hours of training a year. And this training also, typically right now for 2015, there's 14 hours of training required by the state and another 10 hours of training in which chiefs of police are allowed to pick that training, because every department's a little different, every community's different, and it allows that chief of police, to get the training that best meets the needs of their department, which can include this. And I say there's 24 hours of mandatory training, but as you'll probably hear from the chiefs on the panel, you'll find that these chiefs, most departments do a whole lot more training than this. They send their officers through a great deal of training throughout the year continuously. But now if an officer fails to do this training, they will lose their certification and be unable to work as a law enforcement officer until they complete this training.
Nia, I'd like to bring you in. We're talking about some strategies to try to address this concern around racially biased policing. You work with a lot of communities. What are you hearing back from communities about what they'd like to see happen?
Well, there's a few things that I would like to talk about after the things that I've heard so far. The first thing that I want to say is that when we're talking about racial profiling and race-based policing, we also need to talk about class. We also need to talk about age. So we can't just talk about race and as if it is the only thing that we need to be concerned about. For instance, me, as a 50-something-year-old woman, has less to worry about oftentimes than a younger man driving around at night in the streets of Durham. And also, depending on what neighborhood or what community we're in, is also something that we need to think about and talk about. I know that there are many communities that I could go into right now that would not feel like there is not bias or race-based policing that is happening within their neighborhoods. We begin to develop our biases as children, and so 24 hours of training, 36 hours of training, 72 hours of training is nothing compared to 40 years of developing biases. And so there are other things that we have to do in order to be able to address and to measure what's happening when we're talking about biases and race-based policing. You can speak to most police officers who will probably feel like they do not have any biases in them, and they develop those biases very early on. And so while I appreciate the fact that there is training and there is more training that is being offered, there's a lot more, and there are other ways to measure things that are happening, like things like racial impact statements, like actually having checklists. We have some of those. There are more that we can have. And the last point I'll make is about body cameras. While I am not opposed to body cameras, we cannot begin to rely on body cameras. And it seems like this is a conversation that's really a lot of folks are having it. People want body cameras, but using body cameras as a deterrent for bad behavior is a bad move. And so we really need to be talking about who we're recruiting as police officers, so we don't need to be concerned about bad behavior and not relying on cameras to be the thing that prevents people from harming other folks.
I definitely want to talk a little bit about recruiting. Mr. Combs?
Yeah, and I'd like to say I agree with Ms. Wilson that when we talk about 14 hours or 24 hours of mandatory training a year for a police officer, is that enough? And it very well may not be, but we have to strike a bit, a balance as far as the training of these police officers, the cost that's included with this training, and the time spent away from these officers being on the street. And again, even though it's just mandatory, it's the minimum standard. As you'll hear, many police departments well exceed this minimum standard. And, but definitely, it was brought up earlier, fair and impartial training, fair and impartial policing. I hadn't heard of that a year ago, and have since educated myself on it. I haven't been able to go through one of the classes, but this is exceptional training that I believe eventually all of our police officers across the state need to have and partake in. But I agree with Ms. Wilson. There's always room for improvement and to have more training when feasible.
Well, I definitely want to get you in here, Travis, but first I'd like to bring in a question or a comment from the audience that's come via Twitter. Mitch, I'm going to go to you again. Mitch?
Well, actually, I have a question.
All right.
Because especially when you're talking about racial profiling, and I realize that officers have a very tough job, especially once you get out of the patrol car and approach another person. There are a lot of things going through your mind, because in the time that I've reported, there have been times that the situation turns out badly. What is the tipping point to where an officer finally has to change his behavior to perhaps to become more aggressive?
I think the circumstances dictate the answer to that question, and you really have to be in the moment to make that decision. I do think that one way to delay that decision is rapport building and relationship building. And I think it's fair to say that certainly these agencies represented here, and probably most, understand that. There's an awful lot of training that goes on in law enforcement around de-escalation and rapport building. And in fact, a big part of use of force training is about de-escalation and avoiding having to use force. Every situation is unique, and that officer's decision is contingent upon what they see in that moment and the circumstances they're confronted with. But I do think the conversations that we've been having the last few years have really gotten officers thinking differently about the relationships that they need to build before the crisis comes. And I think we're just beginning that work.
We're talking a little bit about relationship building and among other things. And Travis, I wanted to bring you in because you work with a lot of young men, but you also come from a journalism background as a former reporter and also former executive with a television station, so you understand what the needs and the purpose of media are. Can you share with us what the major challenge is that young people are expressing to you about relationship building and how they're being perceived out there, particularly by police?
Well, I think one is I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing. The theory of change in our organization, I think, applies to what we're talking about. And that is, programs don't change people, relationships do. And at the core of what we're dealing with here are mindsets. So mindsets have to be shifted on the side of law enforcement. Mindsets have to be shifted on the part of young people and people in the streets. At the core of the conversation is, do young people see law enforcement officials as protecting them and serving them, or containing them? And that's really a core issue. Are you containing them, or are you protecting and serving them? Now, I really realize that as a part of the dialogue, what I've heard from young people, it's not what you say to me. It's not what you say to me, it's how you see me. And as a 45-year-old African-American male that has dealt with this issue for 20 plus years, when I was the age of some of my mentees who are here today, in my 20s, I was called a menace to society. I was called a boy from the hood. I grew up in Southeast Raleigh. I understood, even though family members are law enforcement officials that I have great respect for, law enforcement, and what our officers do, there is still, if I'm honest, the reality of what it meant when I saw an officer pull behind me. My reality was much different than my colleagues or my peers that lived on the other side of town.
Let me jump in there and just ask our chiefs, beginning with you, Chief Lopez. Is this a sentiment that you're hearing back, that your officers have the opportunity to hear back from young people so that they can understand what it feels like?
Well, I have to say that the same sentiment that you felt as a Puerto Rican in New York, I felt the same thing. The same situation, called the same things also growing up. So my being in law enforcement is something that people truly expected in my lifetime. But the fact that every time the police got behind you, you cringed, I know that cringe because I've been there, so I understand it. And I try to push that upon other officers and so they can also understand it and other people within the organization. We're working very hard to reach out to our youth, trying to bring them to the table and be at the table with them in order to let them know who we are and what we are. Because law enforcement, quite frankly, has not done a very good job of building trust for many years, a lot of years. But the turnaround that law enforcement has had in the recent has been a very quick, very fast revolution that's been going on as far as the turn. And I think that it hasn't caught up with, the community hasn't caught up to see us really where we're at right now, and that we're at a turning point where now is where we need to engage a lot more, a lot closer, and a lot more honestly, and start looking at tomorrow and start finding solutions to what it is that we need to do. We need to understand our youth. When I was at that time, a lot of things happened to me as far as being disrespected by the police, police abuse that we speak of, but there was no venue. There was no one you could talk to. Today, it's different. You can get me a complaint and a sticky note, and it's going to be investigated.
Nia, we've been talking a little bit about relationships, and you addressed this a little bit earlier, but there's more to the relationship building. A lot of time, it sounds like there's more to the relationship building. Share what more that maybe law enforcement needs to understand about what's really needed, the investment to have that effective relationship building take place.
Well, some of the things that I feel about relationship building will probably not be popular up on this stage, because I don't necessarily agree with the fact that there has to be deeper, more trusting relationships built, because there's an imbalance of power when someone has a taser or a nightstick or a gun, and they're talking about developing a trusting relationship with someone who they historically, their family historically, for generations have been abused by the institution of the police. And so I'm not sure that going and playing basketball or taking some boys swimming or even getting out of a patrol car in uniform is going to do the kind of relationship building and trust building that folks are talking about. We hear a lot of that, both from the police side and also from the side of community, right? There are definitely community members who feel like they want more policing happening in their neighborhoods because there are things that are happening in their neighborhoods that they're afraid of, right? So I'm not just speaking in particular about police, but I think that the job of a police officer often is violent. And so you cannot expect someone who has seen some sort of violent act happen because someone that they care about or love has been taken down to then turn around and begin to trust the same people who have committed that violence, whether the person was wrong or not, whether there was a crime committed or not. And so I think that police have a particular job to do. There are communities and neighborhoods in Durham that never see police officers, not in uniform anyway. They may be neighbors, they may live near each other, and so they may have cookouts and do things together because they live in the same neighborhood. But as far as policing, they're never there. And that's because there are some of the things that are happening in other neighborhoods are not happening. So the question for me becomes, what is it that's happening or not happening in those neighborhoods that is happening or not happening in the neighborhoods where there are a lot of police officers. And having more police or having police befriend us are not the things that are going to take care of those other things. And so I believe that there are other relationships and there are other things, there are other ways that we should be spending and utilizing our resources, and that the police should also be talking about that.
So there are multiple prongs on the solution ball. Let's go to our audience. Thank you so much for that perspective. Very important. Mitch?
Now, Deborah, we've had the discussion about fear in the community, and we have a question dealing with law enforcement and guns. Sir, your name and your question.
Chris, Tiffany. Bad shoots are preventable. If you send cops into a low-income minority neighborhoods, if 100 cops pull their guns 100 times, that's 10,000 accidents waiting to happen. Professional cops call cops who jerk their guns out all the time jerk-offs. How do you know which cops often pull their guns unnecessarily? How many times did the cop in the Carlos Riley incident threaten to shoot people in the year before he shot himself?
Let's get a response on the question about training of officers. Chief Blue, can you talk a little bit about what kind of background check is done on those who are interested in becoming police officers, and how are they screened?
It is a rigorous process. From the time you submit an initial application to the time a final job offer is extended, it's probably a 4 to 6 month process that includes background checks, psychological evaluation, drug screening, lie detector tests in many agencies. So people are vetted. Going back to the use of force, and I think this is probably true in all the agencies represented up here, we document every single use of force, and pulling your weapon and pointing at someone, at least in our agency, is a use of force. Every single one of those is documented and evaluated, and in fact has to be approved all the way up the chain of command, stopping with me. So those are carefully and closely scrutinized, both in the individual situation to ensure that we thought it was appropriate, and also to follow trends and consider where additional training might need to happen, or perhaps some corrective action for our employees.
Representative Haynes, you've had an opportunity to, you're an African-American male, so you certainly can relate to being, or possibly the feeling of being targeted. What can you share with our panel and with our audience about this idea of the relationship building, what Nia said about building relationships?
I like the comment with regard to relationship building. Certainly, getting out of your car, playing basketball, or whatever it might be is certainly a great start. But I agree. I would like to see things go a bit further. One of the issues that I've always looked at and believe very strongly is living and learning and loving or praying together. And I think that is where you really start building relationships. And so it's surprising to me when I found out that many of our police officers in Winston-Salem don't actually live within the city limits. They don't live among the people and their children don't go to school with the children who oftentimes they find themselves in direct conflict with sometimes. And so, I don't know if that's the case in many of the other districts, but what I would like to see happen across our state, and especially in our large urban environments, is for our law enforcement officers to actually come and live within these communities. If you want to help redevelop and bring up property values in communities, then we should have law enforcement officers come in and move into beautiful homes on Martin Luther King Drive in Winston-Salem. Lovely homes in many of our different neighborhoods across this state that will actually start the conversation on a daily basis of learning to live with people, learning to respect and love people, and getting that conversation started in a way that perhaps we must get started in order for us to move forward as a state and a country with regard to this issue that we're discussing tonight.
I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Mr. Combs, because we did have an opportunity to speak with you before the program, and you have some very strong thoughts about communities, law enforcement agencies reflecting the communities that they police.
I saw everything that was going on across our country, as many of you did. I saw the things that were going on in our state, and I brought my management team into my office and discussed, I'm not a hiring agency. I can't go out and hire police officers to work for my division. So I asked my management team, what can we do? What's our role in this? So I decided, well, I needed to take this on the road, and I went out and I talked to different police chiefs and school directors. Well, I started talking to these different school directors. Every time that I spoke to them, the same issue started coming back up, and that was minorities in law enforcement. And that these school directors, these chiefs were looking for minorities, but they weren't there. They couldn't get them to the door. And
So
if
you
they
have
did,
a recruiting issue.
absolutely. And if they did get them to the door, there was a problem whether they could meet the minimum standards to become a police officer. So, you know, I graduated from East Carolina University with a degree in criminal justice. So I immediately thought, well, where are these people going who are getting these degrees in criminal justice? So I did a little research, and I looked up and found Dr. McMurray at North Carolina Central University. And I spoke with him and Dr. Herring, who's in the audience this evening, and talked to him about some of the concerns that I had. And I certainly feel that our police departments should represent the communities that they're policing. And I asked him, well, where are your students going? And the short story is, he said, well, why don't you come find out for yourself? And Dr. Herring, again, was very gracious in that he allowed me to come speak with one of his classes. And I asked, well, how many of you are planning on going into local law enforcement when you graduate? And I believe this was a class of about 35 young men and women, and about 3 of them raised their hands. And then, of course, I asked, well, why is that? The vast majority said, because they had no respect for the profession as a whole.
I want to pull in some of our folks from the audience with their comments. Mitchell?
Could I get your name and your question?
My name is Pearlie Williams. I am of NAMI, Durham. First of all, I want to commend Chief Lopez on the training for the CIT officers here in the city of Durham. Thank you so very much. Our numbers have increased. My question is, why is the Durham County Jail so filled with those that suffer with mental health issues? And I feel that it has been racially profiled.
Well, I can't speak to the county jail. That would be the Durham Sheriff's department who handles the jail. But I can say that from the city of Durham, as far as the police department is concerned, we are very much involved in the mental health issues, as you're well aware of, through our CIT program, through our mental outreach program. So we're going to continue to see if we can find a way to keep these individuals who have mental health problems, not criminal problems, but mental health, and keep them from even getting to the jail. And I think that's one of the things that we're working towards at this point in time.
Thank you so much for that question. Let's take another.
Sir, your name and your question.
My name is Irvin Hervey. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for doing your jobs. I mean, thank God for police officers. I pray for you guys daily. The question is, why is it necessary when you pull your guns, you shoot to kill? I mean, is it really necessary when someone's running away? Can't you injure them and pull them in court and let them go to court for what the job, or either let them be guilty or innocent?
Chief Scott, please. Thank you very much.
I can speak for Greensboro and what I know from the state, and I'd like to state, we actually only use deadly force to stop a threat. Stop a threat means to stop the threat to the individual or to the officer. It's not to kill. It's very Hollywood, and we talk about the Hollywood effect all the time about shooting firearms out of someone's hand or shooting someone in the leg to wound them. It's honestly, statistically, it's just not practical. And very often when an officer has to make that decision, they may only have that one shot opportunity. So in Greensboro, we shoot to only stop a threat and we stop at that location.
I think that behind that question is another question that has to do with what happens to an officer after that gun is pulled, after there has been what many would say is questionable response, questionable conduct. A lot of people seem to be disgruntled with what happens after that and what appears to be preferential treatment. What happens to an officer after there is a questionable action taken against someone who was unarmed? Chief Blue?
Well, if an officer pulls his or her weapon and discharges it, and I'm sure this is true in every agency, certainly these represented here, there's an investigation that is conducted. And particularly if there's a shooting where someone has been wounded or killed, in most agencies in North Carolina, the State Bureau of Investigation is invited in to investigate that actual use of force. so that the agency where the officer employed is not doing that investigation of that use of force. An unbiased third party is doing that. That leads to the best chance of an objective analysis being conducted on that shooting. That doesn't happen fast. An officer who fires his or her weapon on duty and an investigation, as I described, ensues, can expect to sit at home for many months, be out of their active assignment for many months, and certainly be concerned about the job and maybe their freedom as a result of that. So it is something we take very seriously, and that kind of goes back to why all that training is so important. The decision-making training is so important, and that post-shooting investigation is very important. Everybody in North Carolina, I can tell you, takes that very seriously.
And
Can I
also,
make
if I
a
could,
comment?
Yes.
if I can interject though, in reference to your comment there, we also make sure that we take them out to make sure that their wellness mentally before coming back to work. If it turns out that the officer was justified in the shooting, then that officer, before coming back to work, would have to undergo further mental health evaluations prior
Ms.
to.
Wilson, you
Yeah,
wanted to make
I'd
a
like to
comment?
make a brief comment about things like investigations, and again, talk about where a lot of people in the community stand. So when you're talking about SBI investigating an incident, or the police officers or the investigating an incident, you're talking about the police investigating themselves. Either way, whether it's SBI or the police department. And so when you talk to community, oftentimes community members have asked for independent investigation tools that are not connected to the police department. And again, when you want to talk about building trust, those are the things that we have to be thinking about and talking about. You know, when you can't see someone's personnel records, or when you don't know all the training that they have or have not had in order to protect the police officer and the police officer's personnel or personal history, there's no protection for those people in the community when things have happened either to them or to their family members. So again, we're still talking about this imbalance of power and what feeds this lack of trust. And I want to comment about why so many folks are in jail. They are being picked up by the police officers. Whether it's the sheriff who holds them in jail, they have to be picked up first. And oftentimes, poor people and people with mental health issues are the ones that are being over-policed, and they're the ones that are being picked up by the police officers. Then they are being housed in the jail. They have not been convicted of anything, but they're too poor to post a bond to get out. So the sheriff's department have said that over 80% of the people in the Durham County Jail are there because they're too poor to post a bond. And oftentimes, by the time they get out, they've already been in there long enough to serve time for some misdemeanor that they shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And so we really need to talk about how often poor people and poor communities in Durham are being over-policed, which is why so many people are winding up in the jails.
Over-policing, another important issue. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Representative Haynes, you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what we're trying to do tonight, and a lot of what we talk about, is communication, and that necessarily involves language and the words that we use. And so one of the instances, or one of the words that I just heard a second ago, was that we train our officers to stop the threat. And I think a lot of what I hear from my constituents in my district is the idea of what exactly is a threat. And a lot of people feel at this point that a threat is if you're a big black man, you're a threat, and that this gives officers a right to stop you, so to speak. And I think there's a fear that's pervasive, in our community about this, not because of what we're seeing, on a day-to-day basis, not necessarily because I think there's evil in people's heart, but the actions are showing us, as we're seeing right now in Charlotte with this horrible situation that we're dealing with, down there right now. One of the quotes that came out was, "I shot him because I was scared that he was going to take, my weapon." And so when we hear that, and when we see that this was a large African-American gentleman who was shot and killed, I think we need to be careful and think about what we mean when we say threat and how we use that language. And I would just like to say to the whole state right now that big black men are not a threat. And
I agree 100%. We have in our audience Dr. Chris Herring, who is a former police chief and has also been traveling around the country talking to police agencies and conducting training. Share with us your thoughts on, we've been talking about fear and training. What would you say about the fear that police have or may not even be willing to admit to, but that fear must strike, and then making that decision in the moment that they're facing a suspect, whether that suspect has a weapon or not?
Well, as a big black man, growing up in the streets of LA, as well as here in Durham down on Fayetteville Street, and also as a practitioner, and then as a researcher on the academic side there, it's all real. The fear and the challenges of law enforcement, the fear and the challenges of the community, the political issues that come from the situations there as well. And if we think about it, and we've spoken about this before, this is something that if we look at the past 60 years, nothing is new, right? So when we look at a rich history of police action, violent action, towards black males, and then riots coming from that, we can go and see for the past 60 years, over and over and over and over again it happens. So we should not be surprised that we're here yet again. So what is one resolve there is something similar to this to deal with the fear is we have to be more strategic, long-term strategic, bringing in the whole community to address the issues. So what does that mean? It doesn't look cute, and it's, and all of those things. So we're saying, let's commit to, in the communities, this is going to take 10 to 20 years to fix. That's the first thing we have to acknowledge. We have to make sure we acknowledge the difference between police-community relations and then the many other things that must take place to fix the problem. We need tangible, measurable strategies for the long term. What about forums like these that become working sessions involving law enforcement, the diverse law enforcement, political leaders, government, citizens, all coming together and say, let's see what impacts our quality of life in our community. And often one of those aspects will be fear of crime and crime, black on black crime, so many different things. Now let's break up and let's attack that strategically to come up with a solution specifically for our community.
You've touched on so many things that have really been a part of what all of you have been saying. And I want to go to you, Mr. Mitchell, and ask, as someone who, once again, can talk about that fear and what is feeding that fear. Some would say, in order to change perception out there, you have to change behavior, whether that's the behavior of the police or the behavior of those who are drawing the attention. What are your thoughts about changing behaviors to change perception?
Part of it is just having a true dialogue and being honest. I didn't come to the program today with an armchair solution. I came to share the reality of the fact that just 2 summers ago, on my way to pick up my daughter in Georgia, I was pulled in South Carolina, which many of my colleagues don't know, so tonight they will hear it for the first time. And I was pulled in a very dark stretch of highway, and I was profiled. The police officer actually said to me, "Trooper," he was cordial, "that this is a heavy corridor of drugs. I'd like to look in your car." And so he searched my rental car. It was an economy car. I don't think that fits a profile. But anyway, I let him search the car. And I just thought back to, this is 20 plus years that I've been dealing with this, okay? Now, the perception issue is I'm a 45-year-old, silver hair now, father. And if it is happening to me, and I have all of the polish that has been added to my exterior now, I have all the coping mechanisms and the training not to blow my stack. What about my young brother who doesn't have that experience and that training? What happens to him if he's pulled over on a dark stretch of road So his fear becomes real, and then it kicks into survival mode because of his realities that I know all too well. So I think there has to be transparency. I think we have to talk about the issue. I think we have to be willing, those of us who now have traded in our sweats with shirt and ties, to understand, have the community understand it still happens. And so the way that I can effect change is I've got a dual responsibility. I've got to train my young men how to survive in those moments. I have no choice but to tell them how to engage with the rules of engagement to survive. That means that your hands at the steering wheel are at 9 and 3. It means that you don't move for the glove compartment until asked, because I can ill afford for a moment of anger to result in the loss of life. Secondarily, I've got to have honest and open dialogue. When I say it's not what the kids are saying, it's not what you say, it's how you see me, that is my statement as well. And that is not about playing basketball or picnics. It is very much about people putting down roots in the community and saying if these communities are going to be some of the best places to live, you can ill afford to have people marginalized on the outskirts of the community, contained, so that those who are the well-to-do are able to protect their valuables. People, all lives matter, and people have got to be seen as valuable. So in the discussion, we've got to get down into the depth. We've got to deal with some very ugly realities and make sure that there's the equal dialogue that says life matters, period, and the sanctity of life should be protected. And we are really depending upon our law enforcement officials to make us feel inherently that when that blue light goes off in the mirror, I know that you're there to protect me. You're not there to arrest me. And if that knot is still in my stomach today, 25 years after first being called a menace to society, then the dialogue has not been deep enough. So I don't have the answers, but I do know that tonight is the beginning of a dialogue that must continue. This is a beginning of something that should happen over and over and over, and at the center of it should be truth. Your experience is not my experience, but I need to be able to understand where you're coming from in order for us to have that deeper level of dialogue. I may not say what you want to hear. You might not say what I want to hear, but at the end of the day, we can walk away with a healthy respect.
But I also think we have to stop this thing around making our family, our children, believe that the only thing that makes and keeps us safe are the police. Like I said earlier, there are communities across the country, the world, where the police officers are not there. And if everybody takes a moment to think about the time when you have felt most safe in your life, it is not necessarily when you saw a police officer. There are so many other things that we lean into that make us safe. And those are the conversations that we need to be having, including police officers. They may feel the most safe when they're around their comrades, but when you're out of uniform, what are the things that make you feel safe? And so we have to stop this thing around saying that the police are the people that are here to protect us. The police are the people that are here to make us safe. There are things that we have to do as community members to make ourselves and our communities more accountable to each other.
I agree with everything, but I was not saying that the police officers aren't the ones who make us safe. I'm saying that I would like to know that when I'm engaging with law enforcement, my first thought, my mindset should be not that there's trouble, but that there's true service.
And that you'll get equal treatment.
And that I will get equal justice.
That you will be treated fairly if you behave yourself.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to go to our audience right now. Mitchell, you have a number of people who want to make a statement, so please.
Well, Deborah, it actually goes along with what Ms. Wilson was talking about, the community as far as law enforcement and community interaction. And I can get your name and your question.
Sure. My name is Kimberly Mukhtarian. I'm president of Save Our Sons in Wake County. And my question is more of a truthful statement. I'm wondering how much of what we expect to be true relationship between community and police, when it's taken up to 2014 and 2015 for us to see the realities of all of the injustices that have come about, and it's taken technology to make everyone honest. And then we ask the question to our children, why don't they want to be a part of law enforcement when it's taken us to 2015 to take down a flag that our entire society watched stand for years? So I don't think just because you're poor or you're in a bad situation that it means that you are blind to the fact. And many of society now sees that we're not just crazy. it is a truth. What we've been experiencing is real, and it's taken technology to bring it even amongst your code of policemen who sit by quietly and allow these things to happen. No one is coming forth to say, this police officer in my staff did this or such. It's technology that is showing the world these things.
Thank you so much. Are we going to take our second comment? We have a line there I want to get to everyone.
Yes, we do, actually. And this is actually going a little bit further, dealing perhaps once you've had a situation take place, dealing with the judicial aspect of it. And can I get your name and your question, sir?
My name is Alex Charnes. I've lived in Durham for 25 years. I'm a parent. My kids go to the Durham Public Schools. I'm a hockey coach, and I'm a constitutional rights lawyer. And my question for everyone, but particularly the police chiefs, part of building trust with the community is believing in our constitutional democracy. And I would like your chiefs to answer the question, do you believe in the jury system? And if a chief makes a comment attacking a jury's verdict, what should happen to that chief? And I'd like to start with Chief Lopez to answer that question.
Well, I understand it's a targeted question. I see it, and I recall it. But what I could say is that I do believe in the jury system and the way it works. And I think that sometimes when you have a jury come up with a verdict, it doesn't mean we have to understand that the individual is found, if they're found innocent, they're innocent. If they're found guilty, they'll probably be appealed. But as far as I'm concerned, whatever the jury says is what goes. But it's not something that would have anything to do with the Constitution, because quite frankly, as a police chief, I also am protected by the First Amendment, and I have the right to make statements relative to what I believe as an individual.
That question also speaks somewhat to what a lot of people believe is a blue code, a fraternal order, where police, law enforcement are protected within that system. As Ms. Wilson was referencing, the fact that there's this system that they are already a part of the family of, that is standing and making sure that that individual is corrected, and people don't trust that. How do you respond to that, Chief Blue?
I was hoping you were going to ask him.
Nah, I was looking right at you.
That's really tough. I mean, because I think that's a very natural assumption to make. And whether that's intentional or not, you know, folks within the criminal justice system at every level of it do work together closely all the time. So it's reasonable for a person in the community to assume that those folks within that system will cover for each other.
And that they'll get preferential treatment.
That's the same assumption I would make if I were on the outside looking in. That's a reasonable, and it really goes to that whole conversation about bias that we've been talking about as well. I don't believe that relationship building and trust building will dispel all of those concerns.
So what other resources out there for citizens who want to make sure that they're getting justice? After their loved one is gone, there's almost no justice, because that person is gone and not even a decision can bring that individual back. But people are just disgruntled when they hear in reports time and again, this officer shot this unarmed man, and at the end of a grand jury hearing, there was no indictment. It just seems as though to a lot of people in the public, there's preferential treatment, and that the grand jury procedure is kind of a safety zone for law enforcement.
Well, and I'll address it probably I'll start by saying this. I think I'm glad that we have the representative here, because I, for one, Chief, and I can't speak for everybody, would like to see a more transparent set of laws governing our personnel records. Because in Greensboro, we have the same critics you hear, we have the same ones we have here in Durham. And very often, all I can say is, we did our due diligence. I would like to have a mechanism on the state level where we balance both the protection of employees, but we had an opportunity to show the due diligence, because I know, speaking with chiefs across this state, that the police departments hold their employees to a higher standard of conduct than probably any other municipal employee, bar none. And we do our due diligence, but we don't have that opportunity. And I think if North Carolina is going to move forward and continue to lead the way, that we're going to have to become more transparent with that. One of the things in Greensboro we've dealt with over and over is we've asked, can we find a way that we can share our body cam video? And I'm sure that our discussion is going to get to that eventually. But right now, the School of Government in Chapel Hill leads and tells us we can't, because body cam is considered to be part of a personnel record. But I do believe that we do make mistakes, and we've said that openly. And as chiefs, we hold our folks accountable. But not everything is a mistake, and if we had those opportunities to actually show our community, I believe we would begin to build those bridges.
My name is Sean Ellison. My question is, well, first, I grew up in an era where technology wasn't advanced as the way it is today. I formed a dislike for law enforcement due to me, of course, not having a male role model in my life. My father wasn't in my life. And the way that I would go to school, I would see these officers, they would talk to me in a way that was not fatherly. They would talk to me in a way that, oh, I have power. And I'm trying to figure out why, when they see a young black male like me who has no father in the home, they feel like, oh, I have to step in a power role, not a father role, but a power role, and talk to him in a way that is not respectful. How do you train an officer to handle the response from a young black male when he sees this every day on World Star Hip Hop, on the news? How do you train an officer to handle that response? Because all they're programmed is to hate law enforcement and not respect or love law enforcement.
I'd like to go to you, Stephen Combs, because you handle a lot of the training and have also witnessed some of the fair and impartial, thank you, Mr. Ellis, for your question, fair and impartial training standards. So can you answer his question?
Well, there are certainly a couple of issues there. One is overcoming pop culture. And he mentioned about the things that he sees on television and in the movies and in videos. And I certainly don't have an answer for that. It plays a huge impact on our youth. As far as the training, I believe right now there's a lot of discussion of fair and impartial policing. Also, this guardian versus warrior mentality that police officers have. And of course, there's a lot of bravado in police work. It's a dangerous job that police officers do every day. And you spoke about when you were pulled and keeping your hands at the 9, 3 o'clock position. And that's where this warrior mentality comes in, because these officers, one of the most dangerous things that a police officer does is pull a motor vehicle over. Especially a trooper out in the middle of the county. You said it was very dark out there. As I've been thinking about these issues, I've Googled a lot of things on the internet, and you can see a lot of horrible things that police officers have done across the country. But also Google officer killed in the line of duty and see these videos of these officers being murdered while doing their job. And it's terrible. It's very frightening. And these officers see this. They see this in basic training and during their mandatory in-service, and they're thinking about this every day, and I assure you they're thinking about it when they approach that vehicle. It does not make it right in any way, shape, or form for that officer to be unprofessional or to violate someone's rights. But this is where I do believe in law enforcement we need to cross over, and I'm here to say not lose the warrior mentality. There's a place for the warrior mentality, but also this guardian mentality where you can look down at a young man while he's in school and talk to him at his level and try to form that relationship, not always being the tough police officer with the sunglasses and the black gloves. And I think there's a place for that, and we're working on developing training for that for our officers in North Carolina.
It's also a dangerous thing for a young man to pull over. It's not just a dangerous thing for a police officer to pull over a young person. It's a dangerous thing for the young person to pull over. And so the imbalance in the numbers, and I appreciate what you said about police officers seeing other police officers killed, but as this gentleman said earlier, what he was talking about, World Star Hip Hop, is not a TV show. It's actually reality. And so what's going on social media every day now is young men being killed by police officers, and the numbers are very different. And so this wild, wild west mentality, this I'm going to be the one to go home tonight, and I understand people want to go home to their families, but so do the people that they call suspects. And the thing is that police officers are not necessarily showing that they're seeing these young people as human beings and as people. I'm not saying that they're not seeing them, but it is not what young people are feeling. When you're called criminal, when you're called suspect, when those are the words that are coming out all the time, then that's what you know that you're seen as. And the humanity of these young people who have as much, if not more, fear when that stop happens is not being acknowledged. And so somebody moving their hands too quickly out of fear winds up with people losing their lives. I'll say one last thing. We have a performance piece, and we talk about what we tell our children. And we say, don't run, don't speak, don't reach, no such thing as routine, lower your eyes, lower your voice, life or death, you have no choice. That's what we teach our children every day.
And I think that it's important for the community to start working with the police department, engaging and involving. The police department right now, we have various youth programs and various cadet programs and things in the community. But I think that we need to start having the community engage themselves more with the police departments, because we do have some mentoring programs that we work. But at the same point in time, we need individuals in the community to start mentoring the kids in the community also. As Chief of Police for the City of Durham, I want the City of Durham to truly reflect the city and the people in the city. And I am a person of color, whether you see it in my face or not. That's just a reality. I was born, raised, and am Puerto Rican. And the reality is that this community needs to understand that it needs to develop individuals to become police officers, to say, I want to take over that job and I want to get there and I want to fix it and make it right and do everything that we're talking about. Because when I was coming up, I had a lot of situations that were negative with the police. And the decision I made was not to throw rocks at headquarters. The decision I made was to get into headquarters and control it. And guess what? I control it today. And that's what we need to teach our children. That's what we need to develop. We need to go out, and a lot of the individuals that I see coming through that are trying to become police officers that are of color, one of the big problems is that they're not prepared to take that initial exam. They're not prepared physically, and it's not the police's fault that they're not prepared educationally to take the exam. That needs to happen in the community. We need to start taking our kids and developing them and saying, yes, you can be a police officer. It is a job that you need to change, and if you feel there needs to be a change.
And Chief Lopez is talking about empowerment. I want to go to you, Travis Mitchell.
I wanted to, we've hit on a couple of issues, and I want to make a point, and I think we all have agreed on this point, but I want to express it. And I think that although I support making sure that we diversify law enforcement, I'm really talking about mindsets that affirm people. Because whether you're black or white or Hispanic, the way you look at somebody is going to determine how you're going to treat that person. And so as a part of the conversation, it's really making sure that we are assessing how people think, how people perceive. And before we speak, we see. That's where I started with my comments. So if we assume and we make a judgment call based on the way somebody looks, that is going to lead to actions. And it's very hard to detect in our training because people can fake that. But you can't fake it when you listen to the way they communicate about folks. And that's where the sensitivity has to come in. Do we create cultures that facilitate and maybe even exacerbate certain behaviors because it's just guys being guys? So we need to make sure that our ears are attuned to how people are talking when the cameras are not on, when social media is not playing, so that we understand that those folks are extensions, ambassadors in the community, and that's where the dialogue happens. Then there's also the pushback on the community. We talk about the code of law enforcement. There's a code in the community as well. And those walls are going to have to come down in order for us to work together to make sure that we have neighborhoods that are protected and thrive. And I do like what I heard earlier. We talk about empowerment. This is not an easy fix. This is not going to be after the panel discussion that it is solved. It may take a generation. Mr. Ellison spoke. It may take a lifetime. But if we continue to work together and not give up, cave in, and quit, we will see change. And we have to celebrate change, even if it be incremental. You celebrate that change, you build upon that change, and then you begin to change the narrative from a personal perspective.
We are having a dialogue, and I want to make sure that as many people who have comments in our audience are heard. So we're going to fire down the line for a few comments and make note of the questions, and then we'll come back to our panel. Mitchell?
Okay, Deborah, you were talking about training, and this is a question actually that talks about police training. Your name, sir, and your question.
My name is David Hall. I'm a civil rights attorney here in Durham. I'm going to preface with a couple of Durham facts first, that the Human Relations Commission made a finding a couple years ago that racism exists in the Durham Police Department. Also, after consent searches were implemented in Durham, probable cause searches then increased by 159%. We were told by our police chief that the biased policing numbers don't really show racism in the policing. My question is about the racial equity training. I'm going to assume that because the officers are charged with taking racial equity training or implicit bias training, that the chiefs have done so as well. My question is, if the chiefs could tell us about how the training has impacted them, and when and how do they expect or want to see your leadership and the results of your experience with the training trickle down to make a dent in these disparate numbers?
Mr. Hall, that's a great question, and we're going to make note of it and get a response. We'll give you an opportunity to think about that response while we take some more comments from the floor.
Well, before we go there, we also have a tweet from Alice, and we've been talking about social media. The question is, has social media honestly been a help or a hindrance? How has it been used at all?
That's a good question as well, and we'll make a note of it. Get right to that. I'd like to take the gentleman in the red shirt, please.
Sir, give us your name and your question.
My name is Minister Rafiq Zaidi, and I'm a follower of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Your question, sir.
Okay, my question deals with transparency, accountability, and trust. I'm from the community. I'm a 72-year-old black man. Been in all the penitentiaries in the country, just about. My question is this: why is it when the courts or the justice system find a party not guilty, a citizen? We have a case of a young black female getting beat down. She was found not guilty. She asked the police to apologize for the beating. We want to know why he didn't apologize.
We understand, but we're not focusing on cases tonight. We're trying to just...
How you gonna have a conversation in the community, not focusing on cases and piecemealing the community?
I understand
it. Have a conversation and a dialogue.
We appreciate you sharing your thoughts, but we're trying to make sure that this isn't
How can we
a
trust
focus.
a chief that refused to apologize for his officer beating a black female down?
Thank you for your comments. I understand, but thank you for your comments.
Let's go to our next audience comment, and thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts.
Yes, sir. Could I get your name and your question, please?
Yes, I'm the big black man named Brett Chambers, and I teach in North Carolina Central. I teach media, and I'm also the president of the Triangle Association of Black Journalists. And so the whole idea of the, first of all, thank you for doing this. This has been great, and thank you for your service, but also thank you for you sharing your comments. One of my things is there's so many layers to this problem. I used to cover this problem myself, and one of it is part of that policy choice, value conflict, political agendas, and public perception. How are you going to wrap up all this, and how are you going to get all of these different layers to connect in a way that the public perception is that it is transparent?
That's likely a question that's on the minds of many people out here. How are we going to come together in a forum like this, take 50 different ideas and problems and tie them up in a bow? Well, a couple of the things that have come from the panel are, number one, it's going to take an investment of time. It's going to take an investment also of getting to know one another. I don't mean to take the answer away from you all, but what I've heard from this panel is also that as far as policy and politics are concerned, at the end of the day, people do have some power to go out there and vote and put people in office, whether that's the sheriff or the president. and there are elections out there. So it's a long process, and it takes everyone taking that responsibility at the polls, taking that responsibility in their homes, as we've heard on the panel. There was a great question from the floor about racial equity training, and I wanted to ask each of you, beginning with you, Chief Scott, when you took the training, I would assume that you did, maybe you can answer whether or not you did, how did it impact you? What did it tell you about yourself?
Well, in Greensboro, when we did the pilot program, we actually did it with community members. And I will tell you, that was the most telling part for us. It was insightful training. When you look at implicit and explicit bias, and we all have bias, and we were able to, over a 3 or 4 day period, I think, 4 days, we were actually able to unpack it and made some friendships out of that room. Kind of what we talked about earlier about how do you get to that point where you let your guard down and get to know one another. So I walked away from there knowing that, number one, it was a good thing and that we had to create this and push it forward. In Greensboro, we did that actually last year. We did the implicit bias by Dr. Lori Friedel. We're moving forward in 2016 with procedural justice because one fits right into the other. And I think you'll see a lot of that coming forward in the department. We're actually fortunate. The departments you see here are probably ahead of a lot of the departments in the state of North Carolina because we're a little bit larger. But what procedural justice does is it begins to look at every decision has a reaction. And we need to get our officers out of that mindset of looking just at what's right in front of them, but when they have that opportunity, to looking further down the road. So it was extremely powerful for me, and something that we mandated for not only our sworn employees, but our non-sworn, every single police employee in Greensboro.
Chief Blue, Chief Lopez, I'm going to let you off the hook and get to Representative Haynes.
I had an answer.
I'm going to let you off the hook.
Because we've already gone through it. So.
Yes, we have in a way. Yes, we have. Wanted to ask you about this question regarding social media. Has it been a help or a hindrance, you think, in shaping public perception, particularly about African American males, and also about policing? What are your thoughts?
I think social media has been a great thing, and I think a lot of it, the reason it's great is because it allows more voices into the room at any given time. It's one of the issues that I argue with my colleagues on the Republican side right now, the General Assembly, about, and that is certainly they control the vote because they're 27 seats up. But I'm more interested in understanding the necessity of controlling the voice, in the chamber. And so I'm always for voices. I'm always for people who don't oftentimes have an opportunity unfiltered to get their words out, to get their feelings out, and do it in such a way where they're not controlled by cameras, or they're not controlled by a mother or father or mentor, whoever it might be. It's how they feel. And it's what they want us to hear. And so from my perspective, in terms of this issue with racial bias in policing and with the body cam issue, social media has been fantastic. That's one of the key ways we communicate and get to understand what our constituents and what the broader community want.
A fantastic impact, you're saying. And Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Social media is great. I heard someone say it, there's nothing really new under the sun. It's just, we've heard the song, I've heard it through the grapevine. Social media is just a more extensive grapevine. And I think the fact that you can put something on the vine and people can hear it and see it and judge it for themselves, the more unfiltered, the better. It may be raw, but it leads to real dialogue and real discussion. We know that had it not been for social media, some of the cases that we're discussing that have driven this dialogue tonight would not have been brought to the national consciousness. So to the degree that social media gives us a true reality check, it is very beneficial.
Well, Mr. Chambers did raise a very good question. Where do we go from here? I'm going to ask all of you to weigh in on that. But first, I'd like to take some more comments from the floor. Mitch?
Your question, sir.
My name's Alexander Scott, and I'm a North Carolina Central alumni. My question is that we know that the more we spend on early childhood education and education, the more that someone is likely to be contributing members of society. With that said, we know that 80 and 90% of convictions that occur, felony convictions, are happen to people who are poor. In addition, we know that the majority of people who are incarcerated lack a high school diploma and are undereducated. So I want to know, from the front end and the back, what are we doing to make sure that we're getting people the proper services and help that they need and resources rather than incarcerating them? And then if they are convicted, what are we doing to help them reintegrate into society? Because there are a multitude of things that disadvantage people in terms of housing and in terms of being a part of the community again when they're trying to do the right thing. So I want to know what you as police chiefs are doing to make sure that you're working with the community to see those kinds of things occur.
Excellent points and excellent question. Chief Scott, I'd like to go to you because we know that you are working on some different programs, including restorative justice. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in response to what this young man shared.
Well, and we're very fortunate. We have a number of folks in our community that are working on some of those very efforts. Within the Greensboro Police Department, we're looking at a restorative justice effort that will actually, the initial stages will be through our school system.
And please clarify for our audience, what is that, restorative justice?
Well, restorative justice is defined by the GPD. I'll tell you that because if you Google it, you'll get about 50 different definitions. What we believe restorative justice is how do we give those opportunities for people, particularly those who make first-time offenses, make a mistake without taking them down the road of the criminal justice system. So it's really something. We have an intensive school resource officer program in Greensboro. 27 officers represent that side of the program. And how do we work with those youth to make sure that they don't, because of one mistake, they don't end up with something on their record? There's a couple other systems that we have here in Greensboro. We have one of our council folks that's currently working on a system by which first-time offenders, we would create a program within the city of Greensboro to give them a job and to give them something to put on their record of an employment, an internship. So we're very well aware of the question and the circumstances around it. Unfortunately, that is another one of those things that it takes a community.
And part of the community is the faith community, who has a lot of presence and power. Right. So you've got some work that you're doing with faith as well.
And one of the things I did when I was appointed as chief is I began to create what we call a faith community council. They counsel for me as chief of police. One of the things that we saw, and we're not blind to what everybody else is seeing in the country, is we see the faith community post-traumatic incidents come up and they take a very leadership role. In Greensboro, I wanted to see that same leadership role on the front side, and we are beginning to build that relationship. It is trying. We have a very vast community that is represented by a lot of different faiths. So we try to let everyone leave their faith at the door, but still working with those connections. And I'll use the term over and over, as you said, Deborah, earlier, building those bridges. We can build those bridges in every single aspect of our community, but we need help. And its partnerships with our faith folks are great, with other community advocates, with some of the people that we have in rooms just like this that come together.
Representative Haynes, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big pieces that I want to touch on there is the education piece. And this is something I'm very passionate about because we all know, and it's something we fight about every day in the General Assembly is coming up, and that is, what are we going to do with our kids? How are we educating our young students? And part of what we know right now is, especially, I'll just use my district as an example, is that if you can't read by the end of the third grade, you're in trouble. You're in trouble in the United States of America. And unfortunately, even in my district, my daughter attends a school that's a 96 or 97% reading proficiency by the end of the third grade. Okay? Probably less than 2 miles away from her, also in my district, is an elementary school where 6% of the students read by the end of the third grade. That school is 99% free and reduced lunch, and it's 99% Black and Latino. Okay? And so as I think about this, we have to understand that everybody in this room has to be responsible and understand that where we can start making a difference right now is making it so our superintendents and the people who elect our school board understand that we will not stand for single-digit reading proficiency, because as we know, when those kids can't read, that's a #1 indicator that they're going to end up in Raleigh with me, except I'll be on Jones Street and they'll be in Central Prison. And that is a problem that we cannot stand for anymore.
Thank you, absolutely not. I would like to go ahead and take the remaining comments from the floor before we leave. Mitch?
Okay, and since we are getting close to time, we're going to try and limit our comments here. And this is talking about building bridges as well, dealing with policymaking. Your question and your name.
My name is Andrea, and my question is, with the policies and procedures that are being implemented in the community, is the community being allowed to sit in on these meetings and make decisions? Because as I'm looking at the panel, I don't see any young Black people being represented here today. So I was just wondering, how's that work?
Chief Blue, could you take that question?
Well, yes, we are working on that. In our community, we're working on a laundry list of policy and procedural improvements that speak to many of the things we're talking about here this evening. And I won't go through the whole long list of those, but I will say that our elected officials in Chapel Hill have asked a couple of our local commissions that deal with social justice issues and advise the police department. We have two council-appointed boards. One is our Community Policing Advisory Committee. They bring advice to me and my staff about how to respond to these issues. And another is a social justice-oriented organization called the Justice in Action Committee. And both of those committees have been charged in Chapel Hill with helping us roll out to our community policies and procedures and operational guidelines that speak to many of the things we've talked about here today, both to receive feedback on those things, but also to keep our community informed about what we're trying to do in response to all the information we're hearing.
Some of the boards, though, I mean, I don't know about the policies in Chapel Hill, but in Durham, a lot of folks can't serve on boards if they have any kind of a criminal history. And so it still doesn't necessarily reflect the community members who are most impacted by some of these things if they're not even allowed to serve on some of these boards that you're speaking about. So I think beyond even the community boards, we have to talk about the community members actually being invited to the table.
And very quickly, I'd just like to add that I know in Winston-Salem, our police chief, Barry Roundtree, and one of our city councilmen, Councilman James Taylor, have been very active in creating these types of boards that you're speaking of and getting the community involved in it, representative of exactly what the young lady was speaking of, making sure that all voices are heard. And so we're very lucky in Winston-Salem to have that going on.
Very well, very well. And two more comments from our audience, please.
Yes, could I get your name and your brief question?
My name is Danae Crowell, and I'm a student at North Carolina Central University. And some of the dialogue happening between our peers is that there is now a lack of respect for even African American police officers because they feel that the African American police officers have to overcompensate to impress their colleagues. My question was, do you feel that, or do you understand that there is that poor citizens and African Americans have to do more to show that they are being compliant?
Okay, to our law enforcement folks, who would like to answer that question?
I'll let my colleagues think about the second part of the question. The first part, about African American officers feeling like they need to overcompensate. I don't know about that, but I will tell you, kind of reflecting back on the story you shared a little while ago, and I appreciate that. In the last year or so, particularly since so many departments are having discussion about bias and really confronting some of these tough issues, the most powerful conversations that I've participated in have been the ones where African American officers tell their white officer counterparts stories like the one you told about when they're off duty, going to visit their mom and dad back in their hometown, or driving to the grocery store and they have an experience just like the one you had, and how that's made them feel. And that is unbelievably powerful and brave of them, by the way, to say that to a colleague who works with them every day, day in and day out, and certainly subject to some of the fraternal nature of this work that is built into this work. You heard Dr. Herring a little earlier talk about this is a journey. This is a journey that we're all going on together to confront some things that are long overdue. And I think we're really off to a good start on this journey because we're having stories like the one shared up here tonight, because we're having conversations in police departments like the ones we're having here tonight. It's going to take some time. But I'm very encouraged. And one thing I want to say just real quickly on the bias training, it's very expensive. And only a handful of departments in North Carolina have been able to fund that training. But I'm pleased to share with everyone that through the efforts of the North Carolina Police Executives Association under the leadership of President Chief James Moore out of Rocky Mount, Z. Smith Reynolds has agreed to fund I can't remember how much, so I apologize, but training for law enforcement officers across the state on implicit bias. This is big. Agencies across the state will get access to conversations like the one we're having here tonight
North Carolina will be leading the nation in access to this important training, and that's something to be proud of.
Wonderful. There's a lot that we've accomplished and a lot more that needs to be done. I don't want to leave without taking one more comment from our audience. Please, Mitchell.
Yes, Deborah, and we have a comment. Could I get your name and your thoughts, sir?
My name is Umar Muhammad. So my comment is, Mama Nia, thank you. Thank you so much for representing the community. I was wondering how you felt up there, sitting up there by yourself with no youth, no black youth, no formerly incarcerated, nobody who's being impacted from this justice system, and you up there all by yourself. How you feel?
It's tough. And I spoke about that earlier, about the fact that, I am a community organizer. I've been a community organizer for a long time, but I'm not as impacted by these issues as so many people who I love. And they should be here, their voices should be heard, and oftentimes, the same biases that we're talking about within the police department are the same biases that are happening within the entire country. And so if we're gonna talk about issues that are impacting people who are being incarcerated, who are being over-policed, their voices need to be heard. I hear their voices, I hear their stories, but I'm not the one that should be talking. And as I said earlier, when we're talking about the community and we're talking about boards and things like that, it's usually people who feel safe that are invited into these conversations, and nothing is being done to make sure that the people who are being jacked up on a daily basis. This conversation is wonderful, but as we're speaking, there are people who are being jacked up on a daily basis, and I use that terminology because that's what's happening to them every day. And I see it, and I hear about it because people come to me, and I also have children. My own daughter was harassed by a police officer last night, and I'm grateful that she got home safely after volunteering for a community event. As she was driving home, she was harassed by a police officer, and another police officer stepped in order to sort of calm the situation down. Had he not stepped in, I'm not sure what would have happened to my own daughter. So this is something that is happening on a daily basis, and we need a lot more people who are impacted daily to be in this seat.
Well, let me say, Mama Nia, thank you for accepting this responsibility and sitting on the panel. And we had this open conversation with hope that young people would come out, and we opened up our microphone to give you that space, and we're glad that you took advantage. We're very pleased that you participated and come out, each and every one of you on the panel. Thank you so much. Right now, it's time for us to come to a close. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for taking time to come out and be a part of this important discussion. Thanks also to the Carolina Theater of Durham for their generosity and cooperation. And thanks to my colleague, Mitchell Lewis, for manning the floor for this discussion. Thanks finally to our audience and our viewers for sharing your experiences, your concerns, and your ideas. Tonight is not the end of the discussion. We invite you to continue the conversation with us. Visit us on Facebook at UNC-TV, share with us via Twitter with #NCIssues, or find information about this program online at unc.tv/FocusOnLaw. You've been watching Focus on Law and Order, Building Bridges, Mending Communities. I'm Deborah Holt Noel. Have a safe night, everyone.
Dream. Martin Luther King had the same thing, but maybe if we all lived in the past, we could all get past discrimination, bringing a young life back. Yeah.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.